Welcome to the Danger Zone, the Terrible Infant Movies and TV podcast. We're back. It's Will. I have Mike with me.
Hey guys, how you doing?
You're just like the co-host at this point,
I'm
right?
just like the fat guy.
I don't even have to introduce you anymore.
Well, you kind of need me to like turn the computer on and hook up the mic.
I'm just the fat guy. No, but I'm saying like
technical guy.
But you're in like every. The original conception was Mike wouldn't be in all of them because he wasn't sure he would want to be, but now he is. So I'm like, you might as well just be the co-host.
Well, we do it in my workspace, and we use my equipment, so I could sit there and do nothing for 3 hours,
like co-executive producer,
or I could talk about stuff that most people probably won't agree with me, and
they'll at you.
People. Yeah, you can at me all you want. I don't care.
Don't at Mike. Actually,
I'm a big dude. I'm not scared.
When we have Logan, by the way. Logan is in the studio with us today, too. So we're going to talk about remakes. So I'm going to start off with just a little spiel from myself about where I land on remakes, and then you guys can do your spiels, and then we got a big-ass list of movies to talk about. Yeah. Well, I mean, on the one hand, it's like, movies are weird because they're both product and they're art, right? And if you're coming from the perspective of an artist, why would you have any interest in remaking somebody else's thing? Why wouldn't you just make your own shit? But if you're coming at it from the perspective of someone who just loves the culture of cinema and loves the idea of making these movies that people will go and see and love and talk about, I understand the idea of like, this is an old movie that's kind of interesting, but I think we can recontextualize it for modern times, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I feel very strongly about remakes and that irks me about a lot of remakes will take surface elements of a film and kind of just redo the plot, take some of the characters, rather than digging into what is the essence of this film and what is it actually getting at, and how can I take that? And just to give you one example, I'm not going to ramble too much here, but like RoboCop is a perfect example. The essence of RoboCop is not a cyborg cop; it's a satire of the movie-going public's obsession with violence and revenge. And so if you just make a movie about a cyborg cop, you're not remaking RoboCop, you're just taking the name and slapping it on another movie. So if you guys want to have your...
Cyborg Cop 2. Okay.
So with me and remakes, it's weird because inherently I don't hate the idea of a remake. For example, like if you see a movie or you see like a movie with characters and you just love them and you want to remake a movie, you want to remake that movie because you love that stuff, that's nothing wrong with that, right? Because like, you know... You like that stuff, and, you know, yeah, sure, you can create your own content, your own movie, but you want to do that because you're in love with that content. My problem with remakes is so much of them suck, right? It's not that they're being made, and it's not like that remakes happen or that my beloved films are being remade or have sequels or whatever. That's fine. I like seeing some of that stuff. It's just they almost always turn out so bad. And I don't know why. It's like... You have all this base material to draw off of, but whether it's the people involved, I think the big thing that happens is
dates.
The reason they're so bad, and the big thing that happens is they're used as a cash cow, right? They see a film that did well, or they can attach a name to that they can make a quick buck, and they make it without really caring about if it's going to be good or not, and that's why they always turn out to be shit. Not always. There's some good remakes.
I would argue that there are remakes
some even better remakes
too,
that are better than originals. There's not a lot.
The obsession with IP, which is intellectual property, and it's stupid to say no movies are original now. Everything is remake or based on existing IP, because the very first films ever made were like Nosferatu is a ripoff of Dracula that they didn't get the rights to. They got sued by Bram Stoker's widow. This has always been happening. Like, it's not confined to the present, but I do think that there now more than ever is an obsession with IP, because it's like, what is your built-in audience? Yeah. And remakes, like, people will get the rights. Like Red Sonja is being remade, and Bryan Singer is attached to it, who is, you know, we're not going to talk about his personal life, but he is a big name who commands a big paycheck, remaking a shitty ass movie because someone got the rights to it. Like, that's why that's happening. Yeah. So, Logan, do you want to?
I think this is a thing I was talking about. Number one, I think we're in the age of Hollywood is running out of ideas. So let's take an existing idea from 30 years ago and make it relevant. But number one, the sort of millennial generation, and I guess I'm a millennial, but my point is, I guess whatever generation we're in now, like how do we know that the generation now is going to even respond or resonate with something that happened 30 years ago, and we're going to say that this thing that happened then in that time period is still going to be relevant in today's world. And sort of the other thing about remakes I want to say, so there's that. The other thing is that if you're going to remake a movie, why do you have to remake the movie the same way it was made back then? What is the point of remaking the movie? Or is it that you have to sort of lay your cards between sort of the old school who wants to see all this in the new film because they're used to seeing the old one? Why don't you go watch the old one?
Well, that's like The Force Awakens, right?
And that's kind of
exactly.
It's basically a remake.
Yeah. Or, just make this new thing that has the name. Like, what is the point of... Why do you have to, if you're going to remake a movie, put everything from the old movie in the new one? Or at least reference
and then the
it,
fans
and
would
then
argue,
they
right?
They kind of sandwich the new stuff that's like this very thin layer to give it some new dimension or something in the new movie.
Before this podcast, me and Will were talking about Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. And in my mind, I'm like, what was the fucking point of that? Because... we watched it, and instantly I'm like, it's way worse than Hitchcock.
Yeah, and the thing is,
worse framing, and he had way more money,
and
I'm sure.
You can, whatever you want to say about Gus Van Sant, I'm not trying to insult
I'm not trying
him.
to trash him.
Alfred Hitchcock is one of the best filmmakers of all time. Period, bar none, especially in terms of visual design. So why are you going to try to match his shots? It's just
what's
stupid.
the point? Because you're not adding anything. What I will say, to me, movies that are ripe for remakes are the films that maybe had an interesting idea but just weren't made well.
Exactly.
And you can remake it and you can make it better. Or maybe something happened where the idea they had, they just didn't have the technology to do it, something like that.
So we want to jump into titles because I have some things that I've written down that kind of, and this ties into Mike's point about it wasn't well done, it wasn't perfect the first time or whatever, and also kind of the point that I was making about things where you can take the essence of the film, like you can take the themes or the elements that are interesting and modernize it. I think that sci-fi and horror work really well for that because, to give you a couple titles that I have written down, The Thing, The Fly, those movies in particular, you could take a movie, you could take the basic concept of a movie, but then adapt it to what's the modern technology that might be involved, but what are also the social fears that might be involved, and how is it contextually different for our world than it would have been for...
Well, I can talk a little about The Thing, because The Thing is probably one of my top 5 favorite films of all time.
The John Carpenter
one, sorry.
And I will say before, and I'm not trying to interrupt you, but a lot of people hate on the original Howard Hawks The Thing. When I was there was a period when I was a kid when everyone had VCRs, and it was the new thing that my dad was going through and renting all these classic movies for us to watch. And that was one of the ones that we saw, and I was maybe 6 or 7. That movie scared the shit out of me. And I still really like that movie. And people hate on it, but I think
people hate on it in what way?
People hate that movie.
What? That movie is great.
People hate that movie.
They torched the thing with the
I know.
flamethrower.
It's so scary.
What?
Dude, that movie scared the shit out of me.
Can you imagine watching that when it came out? The guy on fire. That's probably that's stuff.
Wait, but let's hold on. Howard Hawks is a genre filmmaker. Didn't he co-direct the thing? He didn't. He wasn't the main director.
I don't know. I just know his name's attached to it. But people hate that movie.
What's interesting about that is that 50s version. So it's all based on a book. And the 50s version is actually a loose adaptation of the book, whereas John Carpenter's remake of The Thing is actually way closer to the source material. And then they remade that thing in, I think, 2010, 11, something like that.
Right, and it's got Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
And I didn't have
Joel Egerton.
Is he really?
And I love the John Carpenter's The Thing, and it's when people remake a movie that you love, you're like, oh man, I can't believe they're doing that. I didn't have any problem with it. I saw it. It was crap. What I remember very much from John Carpenter's The Thing, aside from, the setting and all that stuff, all male, right? All male cast, and that could be sexist, misogynistic, but it made sense in what was going on. They were all trapped in
military thing, right?
They were a research station in Antarctica, is all male. It made sense, and they put female lead in the new one, which is fine. It didn't really change the movie at all. It's whatever. But the way they had the alien be discernible, they couldn't use the blood thing. I don't even remember if they used the blood thing or. I didn't see the new one.
So if you see the thing, the way that you can tell who is, it's the basic premise is that you can't see the alien. It just affects people, and it
mimics you. But every part of it tries to survive. So if you cut it, that blood will try to protect itself. And so they do a blood test where they draw everyone's blood and try to burn it. And if the blood tries to get away from the hot poker, it's the thing.
Yeah.
And I think in the new one, the way she finds out at the very end, there's only 2 people alive in the very end. The guy she's
Wait, hold
talking.
on. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Sorry, spoiler alert of the new one.
Pause.
She sees
Pause
the
the
guy, and I think
podcast.
he doesn't have an earring because the thing can't materialize.
It's like T1000.
Non-organic thing.
Oh, but it's
Nice.
like it's a very succinct ending.
Yeah,
it's not
but
like
if
so
you wa-
ambiguous as an ending as the 1984
No,
version.
Nice.
that's even worse.
And stabbing weapons.
And it's so in the original, they both obviously you don't know who's the thing.
Yeah.
It's left ambiguous. They
Yeah,
both
so-
they're
yeah.
both dying.
So
They
spoiler
both
alert.
die.
You're talking about the 80s one?
Yeah, the 80s one.
Yeah,
you don't see him die, but they're in the middle.
So
of
Kurt
Antarctica
Russell,
in the
what
winter.
happens at the end is Kurt Russell and Keith David are the last 2 guys left alive, and they're abandoned in Antarctica, and like their station's
And
been blown up, and it's like, yeah.
they're
So-
gonna freeze to death shortly.
Yeah.
Which is this? The plan was so they freeze to death, so the thing freezes to death, and can't escape. And they're sitting at the end. You don't know who the thing is. It's left ambiguous.
Yeah,
There's
because
all these conspiracy theories
they
about.
calculate the rate about how, or don't they calculate like how quickly it would take over the world or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah.
So they know they have to kill it.
Funny thing is, when he's calculating that, and you see the little cheap computer animation, that wasn't actually shot for the film. But the runtime of the thing was pretty short, and people were confused. So John Carpenter added that little bit at the end, as it's basically exposition, and it's really cheesy. He added it separately and just put it in the
Well, that's
movie.
like the fog too, right?
Yeah.
The fog was too
The
short,
story,
so they added like
yeah.
a 5-minute monologue at the
in
beginning.
the beginning where he's
It's
just
some
telling a
old
story.
man.
It has nothing to do with anything. But the remake, I had no problem with it. It's just it wasn't very good. And the thing with the 82 that was so good was the practical effects. Were just amazing, and they still hold up when you watch it.
Well, and also I would
New
argue
one, it's
that
not
the
like that.
50s one is very much like a 50s kind of like monster type movie, alien invasion. Like you think of like because it's a similar premise to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? Where you take the body and an alien replaces it, and you can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
The Thing is very much like a modern film. So you take a similar kind of premise and you turn it into this modern paranoia, like surrounded by technology, and like it has a very 80s feel, and it like works. And then so The Fly.
Just one more thing before we leave this film.
Do it.
We were mentioning what I think is a good candidate for a remake is a film that's done poorly that can be remade better now. So The Thing was done really well and didn't make a lot of money. To me, that's like the last film you'd want to remake because you're probably not
the one from the 80s.
Yeah, you're probably not going to remake it better, and it already didn't make a lot of money. So like, what do you? And the new one didn't make any money either. So like, what are you trying to do here? Didn't make sense to me.
The Fly, the David Cronenberg version,
It's really good.
really good, and I mean, it obviously improves the effects of the first one. It adapts the technology so that it's more modern. But it also
these are good remakes,
and
right?
I love like mad scientist movies. I just do I love a good mad
That
scientist.
guy goes crazy.
And what's that? I'm getting off topic, but there's like that. What's that movie where there's like a mad scientist who like chops the hands off an ape and puts them on a hooker or something? It's really weird.
Is that a real movie? Or did you just make
Frankenhooker's a
that
real
up?
movie.
I don't know.
But anyway, now I'm getting confused because there's a movie where he chops the hands off of a murderer and puts
Idle
them on
Hands?
another person. That might be it. But then there's another one
I know what you're talking
where
about.
there's like a mad scientist using like the blood of a murderous ape and injecting it into hookers or something like that. Anyway, I love a good mad scientist movie. But David Cronenberg, again, like John Carpenter, creates this very modern sense of like if you think about like in the 1950s. When you're dealing with paranoia and fear, you're dealing with like the McCarthy era witch hunts, you're dealing with the Soviet Union, we're dealing with real palpable stuff. In the 1980s,
Cold War, you kind of deal with
well,
a lot
the
of
Cold
same
War
stuff,
exists, but to me, it's like you've moved into this era of like just like mass consumerism and a relatively healthy kind of sense of like you're not worried at any given moment that like it's not like you're living on the the precipice or like you've just come over World War II and you're still living with visions of like 60 million people dying and like it's like paranoia becomes this thing of like you're living in this world of this technology you don't understand. People are starting to use computers in the 80s, right?
Cell phones,
and like you're bandying
stuff
about
like
the
that.
idea of like Terminator was made in 1980 what? 84?
84.
So
Terminator's 84,
already
yeah.
you have the idea of artificial intelligence, right? And like like the technology so infects the way that people think that you can take The Fly and adapt it and make it work in that context. So where would you guys rather go right now? Because I'm a huge fan of monster movies, so I've got some of those written down, but there's so much horror that we can talk about.
I'm open. Let's just jump. Let's just dive right in.
I don't know. I wrote this little blurb about Friday the 13th versus the new one, and then going back to my comment.
I love Jason movies, so let's talk about that.
Let's do horror. Let's go with horror. What do you got?
So I made a list of the original movies and the movies that were remade. And I said this thing about Friday the 13th, and I like to preface this with sort of Halloween kind of was a different film compared to like the brutal slasher movies of the 70s. Some of them were just absurdly violent and misogynistic, and the Italian ones especially. Never mind the American ones, but just in talking about Friday the 13th versus the 2009 one, this idea. So in the new one, I just watched the trailers. I haven't seen the trailer for the 2009 Friday the 13th.
Oh, I've seen that movie.
I haven't seen it, but there's this idea again that I'm talking about. Like it prefaces the old film by saying, we have the stupid teenagers who go to the cabin in the woods, and then they find the lake where the kid drowned, who was Jason, right? But you have to set the lore of the film, and then on top of that, build this sort of garbage story, around that. So I'm gonna just read what I said. The remake takes the lore of the first film but references it. Do remakes always have to reference the first one? Is this a necessity of the remake? The original has to be referenced for what reason exactly? Collective consciousness has only seemed to go down in recent years, not gone up. There is more content that comes out on a weekly basis than there has ever been in history, and there will only be more. If you think about it, there is too much content, but that is besides the point. The idea that these new characters come back to an old place and discover something, or it's basically a rehash of the original. My point is, why can't remakes be their own thing? If a movie is remade, who is to say that the viewer will even go back and watch the original? Usually that's not even the case. People think movies that come out now are new and are ignorant of what has come before. So if that is the case, why can't we just completely make this new version like its own thing? And do we have to always reference the original one?
If you don't reference it at all, and if it's completely different, it's not really a remake because it's
that's what I'm saying. Just make a different movie.
What I will say though, what's interesting is I've seen almost all the Friday the 13th movies, and I've seen the new one, or it's not really that new anymore, but the newest.
I still think of it as the new one.
Yeah, the new one, whatever. I think actually the new one's really well done. But it's kind of weird to me because it's a remake, right? Friday the 13th.
Well, so
but Jason wasn't the killer in Friday the 13th,
that's the thing,
right?
yeah. So that movie's really interesting because I would
like
almost
Friday the 13th,
argue it's a
original.
Reboot because it's like,
which is a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah,
right?
but it's like, so Mike's like the point that so spoiler alert, if you've seen the original Friday the 13th, came out in 1980, the killer is Jason's mom.
Yeah.
And Jason, the hockey mask dude with the machete, is not in that movie. Yeah, he comes in later. And so I've seen every Jason movie, and I really like the Friday the 13th series. Jason 6 is my favorite, I have to say. Jason Lives.
Jason Goes to Hell.
Jason Takes Manhattan. Jason Goes to Hell is number 9. Okay. Jason Takes Manhattan I really like, and a lot of people think it's a terrible movie, but that's why I like it, because it's just so stupid.
It's really dumb.
There's like a couple where they get into like the kids with the psychedelic powers, like that's maybe 4 or 5. I don't like those ones so much, but this one that Logan is talking about is interesting to me because it's basically what they've done is they've taken all of the Jason movies, taken the elements about them that you remember,
and even in the trailer they have like the different kills. Like, was that like how everyone dies?
Yeah, it's like it's like you're taking, because Jason is an interesting series because there are bad movies in there, and there are elements to them that didn't survive beyond the one installment that they come up in because fans didn't like them. So it's like you're taking the greatest hits of the Jason series and making a movie based on that and kind of trying to re-energize the series more than it is like, here's a remake of... So like, I would say that Rob Zombie remade Halloween, right? Like that's an actual remake. Yeah. Whereas this Jason movie is almost like, let's just reconceptualize the dawn of the series.
Yeah, I feel like it's one thing I was mentioning. I feel like those filmmakers really liked the Friday the 13th series and wanted to make a movie and somehow got the rights to do it. And to me, if it did feel... With me, the problem with... I do like some of the Friday the 13th movies, but aside from like the first two, maybe they're more comedy than horror. They're like really goofy slasher films. Like some of them are completely comedic.
No,
like,
well, Jason
Takes Manhattan is like, come on, that's not even.
That's over the top. And
It's
Jason,
so over the top.
Jason Lives, which is my favorite
Yeah.
one, is so obviously a satire that there's a scene in the movie where it cuts from a hamster running in a wheel to a kid in bed at summer camp. Like this kid's like 6 years old reading No Exit, the start play. So it's like
It's so
outwardly a satire.
Whereas the reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it, it's very serious in tone, and it was very brutal.
And like the kids are stupid, which was funny to me. It's
but
like,
they're always stupid.
But
in
it's
those
almost
films,
like this
right?
meta device of like, well, we
It's like they have to be
need the
stupid.
stupid oversexed teenagers,
Yeah.
but they actually have some really funny lines like as the stuff is happening.
I will say of the Friday the 13th movies, they're fine. I like the first Halloween and maybe one or two other ones, but as a series, I don't like them.
Well, let's talk. If we want to talk
feel
about
like
Halloween, didn't Logan
Nightmare on Elm
just watch
Street,
them
yeah.
all?
I feel like Nightmare on Elm Street is the best of those to me.
Did you see the Nightmare on Elm Street remake?
I did not, so I don't want to talk too much about it because I'd sound stupid.
And Rooney Mara's in it, right?
I know Jackie Earl Hale.
Yeah, he plays Freddy. I heard it wasn't very good. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Apparently, the Goldbergs just had some
Leatherface
sort of thing with Nightmare on Elm Street in one of their recent episodes. This week,
I think
last
Robert
week,
Englund was in an episode.
Yeah.
But
I really like
and I know they remade Leatherface too.
The idea of Nightmare on Elm Street.
The 2003 one. Yeah,
the Texas Chainsaw remake was very brutal.
I have that on DVD. It's and even more brutal is the 2005 one. That's
the one I'm
absurdly
talking about.
violent. The 2003 one is not that violent. The 2005 one is absurdly violent.
Yeah.
I don't know which one I saw. Which one is
Jessica Biel? Is the 2003.
I've seen that.
The 2005 is like a sequel to that and has like Arlie Ermey in it and some other people.
It is so extremely violent.
But so
the part where they take the chainsaw and chop up the guy's legs, it's like.
But Texas Chainsaw Massacre it's an interesting one because Toby Hooper,
Tube or whatever you pronounce it.
He there are interviews you can read where he talks about watching the news from Vietnam and like that's just like sitting in front of your TV watching like this obscene amount of violence and it just being part of your everyday normal life, and then tied into that this notion of like with Nixon as the president and this like, and you see this in like what's that Dennis Hopper movie, Easy Rider, and you see this in like more recent stuff that examines that this is the transition from the 60s into the 70s, like what's the Paul Thomas Anderson film Inherent Vice, of like the conservative violent backlash to like the hippie ideals.
Probably Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well. Right?
So yeah, I'm sure we're gonna see it in that and like
it's a Tarantino movie.
So Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like he's addressing this like backwoods violence against idealism and also the Vietnam War, whereas are the remake, and I don't remember I saw the 2003 one. I don't remember it that well, but are they just stupid, violent movies? And if so, is there a point to them existing?
You know, what's funny now that we've been talking, I realize the big horror franchises, they've all been remade and rebooted. All of them.
Yeah.
And not just like rebooted once and that's it, but like rebooted and sequels and then
spin-offs.
Like Halloween, because Rob Zombie rebooted did 2 movies and now there's another one. And
but the other one is a part of the original series.
Yeah.
Right?
They ignored everything except the first 2.
Yeah.
First one.
No, I think I read it's a direct sequel to the second one because Jamie Lee Curtis is in the second one.
They cut out the second one.
They did?
They cut out the second one.
Okay, but no spoiler alerts on. I mean, no spoilers on this one because I have. No, I'm saying don't spoil it because I haven't seen it and I want to.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. I want to.
Well, basically, this one is supposed to deny the existence of 2, so that's why.
So another note I have here, speaking of extremely violent horror movies, and Mike, you'll have to talk about this because I haven't seen it. Last House on the Left.
Yeah, I've seen the original, which I think was 73.
So fucked up.
Something like that. It was early 70s.
Yeah.
And then I've seen the new one, and I'll talk about both.
And that's the original is
Wes Craven.
Yeah, Wes Craven.
And he did. I don't know.
Wait, what's the other movie I'm thinking about?
Hills Have Eyes.
Which is also Wes Craven. Which I have on my list. I've seen both of those. We can talk about that.
I don't know. While you think, I'll talk about Last House on the Left. So the original,
we should point out it's an extremely notorious film.
It's a very notorious film, and it's a very violent film.
Okay, that is the one.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Spoiler alert! If you haven't seen it and you don't want to hear about it, So it's a very simple story though. It's these punks, this like small gang. I think it's like 3 or 4 guys, and they do their bad stuff. And these 2 girls are going to a concert, and they somehow run into them, and they score weed off them, and they go to their hotel room, and they drink, and they do all this stuff, and then they go to the woods. And the 2 girls are.
Aren't they on the way to the woods, or
no? It's a concert, and they end up in the woods somehow, and I can't remember if it was after the concert or they just go to score more drugs or whatever. And the gang basically they rape these 2 girls really bad, and they end up killing them both. I think in the original, one girl gets to the river or to the lake, but she dies there, and she floats up. Her parents live nearby in a house, and she kind of floats up, and they find her body in grief. And then later, I think it's the same night or the next night or something, there's like a storm, and the gang kind of goes for help at a house, and then they go to their parents' house, and then they get tortured and killed and all that stuff.
The parents go ham on it.
They go ham on it. It's great because you really, it's one of those movies where the protagonists are doing really violent, bad things, and you cheer for them because the people they're doing them to were so awful. In the remake, it's almost the same story, except the one girl is raped, but she manages to get away, and she's just wounded really bad, and she floats back, and her parents get her, and she's still alive, and the gang comes to the same house, and it's kind of the same story, except the girl's still alive, and one of the gang members in the new one is kind of like a good person, kind of redeemable, and helps the parents out. It's still pretty violent. I think there's a scene where like they're fighting and there's like a blender and like shove a hand in and then shove on it. Part of that, so the original is very notorious. The violence was bad, but there's a lot of violent films like that. The rape scenes were very graphic.
I can't watch that stuff. That's why I've never seen those movies.
Like I Spit on Your Grave is real similar to that.
And we need to talk about Straw Dog.
Yeah, there's a lot of films like that. I found this one a little... I Spit on Your Grave I just didn't like because it was basically half an hour of rape and then 40 minutes of revenge. Whereas this, it was a very brutal rape scene, but it was quick, right? It was a bad thing and it happened, and the rest of the movie was the whole revenge thing. And all the bad guys got what was coming to them. The new one, I don't really get what the point of the remake was because it didn't drastically change the films. And it's not a film that made a lot of money then or was going to make a lot of money now. So it's like, again, one of those films, why remake it?
I guess maybe just because it was
in that... Your Grave was remade too.
It was in that era of horror remakes, right? So, and around that time, The Hills Have Eyes was also a remake.
Although the remake of that was amazing.
Yeah, awesome. But that guy's an amazing director.
Yeah.
He also did the Piranha remake.
Which was really fun.
Which is amazing. I love that
Not
movie.
Piranha 3D, but the
Piranha
first
3D
one.
With Christopher Lloyd as like the crazy scientist.
What happened?
Scientist movies.
What they did is they got some good actors to be in it.
Ving Rhames is in it.
And Elizabeth Shue and Ving Rhames, they got some good actors to be in it. They got a good director. And even though it's silly and fun, they had good people involved.
But in the very first scene of that movie, Richard Dreyfuss it's like
Richard Dreyfuss is
it's like an allusion to Jaws. Like the movie is very self-aware, and it's very funny.
Yeah, I think in the second one, Robert Englund is doing a cameo.
But Christopher Lloyd is like, they find like they find a piranha in a cave or something.
It's so stupid.
And they bring it to him, and he's like, "This species of piranha has been extinct for 2 million years." It's just like so obviously like a joke. But The Hills Have Eyes is brutal.
Yeah, the original is pretty brutal. I think it's a 1977 was when it came out.
Speaking of that movie, I saw a double feature. It was for Wes Craven's when Son of Family used to be open. They had a double feature of The Hills Have Eyes and... No. Was it Hills Have Eyes? No, it was Last House on the Left and some TV movie he did. But
yeah, I think The Rainbow and the Serpent or something like that. The Black... I don't know. He did a bunch of stuff early on, but the original was pretty brutal in itself. They burn someone alive in it, and they do a lot of the
So The Hills Have Eyes is about these mutants who... It's people who have been mutated by nuclear testing in the Southwest.
Yeah.
And inbred over generations, and they find these people whose car break down or something, right?
They get people like that, and they've done it before, and so it's about that. The remake was really I think it's the same guy who did High Tension, right?
And he did Mirrors with Kiefer Sutherland.
Didn't he do Piranha?
Yeah, he directed Piranha, and he did Horns with Daniel Radcliffe.
He does a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But that movie was very brutal, but it was like one of those movies that was the original was good for itself, but it's very dated now. It's violent, but he really ramped it up in the new one. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a remake that worked, and then they did a sequel to it that just like killed everything.
Horrible. It was horrible,
and it just killed everything.
But one of the things that I think makes the Hills Have Eyes remake really good is that guy is a really good filmmaker, and he chooses to make horror films. But it's like, I think a lot of people who go into horror
it's seen as like sort of like a lesser.
Yeah, they don't have like a good sense of like visual design. They don't have like a clear idea of what story they're trying to tell. They're just like, let's just put together some brutal violence. And this guy is actually really good at making good movies. He just likes really.
It's the whole torture porn scene that went on for a while. And I like really violent films, but I hated all those films.
But like, for instance, Eli Roth I don't have any problem with Eli Roth. I
just don't like his films.
He's not, but I don't think he's a particularly good director.
He's fine.
Well, now he's a studio director too.
But he did that movie with Jack Black, right?
Yeah. But it's like I've seen Hostel, both of them. I didn't care
see the
for
second
them.
one.
I saw the Green
Inferno.
Inferno.
I have to say, I thought the first one was funny. I heard the Green Inferno was terrible.
It's bad because I've seen the films that it's obviously. It's basically a remake of all the cannibal movies, like Cannibal Holocaust and Cannibal Ferox and some of those films. And I've seen all those films. And it's basically a remake of that. It's like less realistic than the old films.
But wasn't it sitting?
Right?
I heard that movie was sitting on a shelf for a while.
It probably was.
And then someone decided to put it out.
There's just it's not going to make money. Like, no one's going to see it.
Well, but that movie is interesting because they only did online advertising for it.
Yeah.
So they spent basically nothing advertising. So even though it did make a lot of money, they made their money back.
Yeah, well, that's good. What else we got? Remakes.
Evil Dead.
Any horrors? Evil Dead, yeah.
I've only seen Evil Dead 1. So Evil Dead is interesting because Evil Dead 2 is basically a remake of Evil Dead 1 with more money. But then they also remade Evil Dead recently, which I have not seen.
Yeah. And then there's the show.
But I do think it's an interesting idea for the same filmmaker and the same basic crew and actor.
I do like that. Like,
we have more money, let's redo it.
The first one's like a proof of concept, basically.
Yeah.
And then the second one, it's like, all right, that was good. Here's some money.
Let's
remake
do it for real.
And then they made a third one, which was completely different. Funny.
Army of Darkness.
I did see the new one, and it's interesting because they did try something new, right? The first and second one are so goofy and silly on purpose, whereas the new one did try to be a bit more really serious and violent. It just didn't work. I don't know why.
Is it really? How violent is it? Because I've heard it's really violent.
I don't think it's that violent.
Not that bad.
There's a lot of blood, and people associate blood with really violent, but it's not. It's bloody. And Evil Dead's never been a super violent series. It's It's very fun
silly,
horror.
Yeah,
silly. Even the show, the Ash vs. Evil Dead show, it's violent and has a lot of blood, but it's not super dark or evil or anything like that. It's just fun. And the new one did try to be a bit more serious in its approach. It just didn't work for me.
So
I think why the originals worked was with Bruce Campbell, and there's not another Bruce Campbell. You can't just.
And the first one was made really cheaply, and they did the whole thing with flying through the forest. Like they put the camera on this little board, and there were two guys running through the forest like this, And
the tentacle rape scene. They wrapped her up and then pulled off and then just
shot it backwards.
Yeah. They did a lot of that kind of stuff. It's cool. It's inventive, right? You have he probably had $25,000 back then. And that's it.
Yeah, that movie was made for nothing. So one more horror thing before we pivot a little bit. Cape Fear. I haven't seen the remake. I've only seen the original.
I've only seen the original.
So the remake. It was in 92.
Scorsese film.
Scorsese did, and De Niro. I like De Niro quite a bit.
And what's her name from
Julia Lewis? And also Nick Nolte.
Oh yeah,
Nick Nolte and Jessica Lange.
The parents, right?
Yeah, so really good cast. It's a really good movie in the sense that it's just like he's so menacing in it, and it's a completely different character than Rob De Niro done in any other film. He's so menacing and he's so creepy and yet charismatic in it. If you watch The Simpsons,
it's like a high school, right?
If you've watched The Simpsons at all, right? Sideshow Bob.
Yeah.
Basically, everything he does is Robert De Niro from Cape Fear.
That's amazing.
I don't know if you've seen the first time they introduce him, Sideshow Bob, where he follows the family under the car and he straps himself in.
Yeah.
Directly from Cape Fear.
Is it?
And when he gets on the houseboat with them in the end.
Well, the houseboat's from the original.
Cape Fear. Yeah, that too. But like, so he is exactly how Robert De Niro is in Cape Fear.
And is it worth having remade? Do you think? Do they bring enough?
I think they do, and Scorsese was really smart because he gave Robert Mitchum a role, and I think Gregory Peck, I want to say, from the original. Yeah. He gave them roles, and not tiny roles, but like pretty substantial roles in the new one, which tied it in. But I think it's just like it was so more menacing. Robert De Niro was just so good in it that it made sense to remake it. I don't know how much money it made. I don't know. It's well received.
What year was that? That was after
92.
Goodfellas?
It was 92, so it was right after Goodfellas, which was 91, I think, or 90.
Then he made Casino after that.
I love Casino because Casino has like 90 minutes of exposition.
It's so good.
And it's awesome. It's
so
just like voiceover.
Joe Pesci talking about what he's doing.
Joe Pesci talking about stuff.
Awesome.
And then talking about gambling.
So pivoting to, I'm a big fan of monster movies. I love like the old school Universal monster movies. Mm-hmm. So The Mummy.
The Mummy, yeah.
Because we have Boris Karloff. It's a classic movie. I love that movie. I also really love the Brendan Fraser one.
It's so different.
It's so and that's why I think it works, because the Boris Karloff one, obviously it's like so early on. Yeah. It's like 32 or something like that. But it's those Universal monster movies, especially like Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, like the 30s ones.
They've been remade.
Because Wolfman is very different. Wolfman was in the 50s, I think. But it's like they have a template. It's like it's so obviously set in studios. And it's this kind of like gothic sense of like creepiness. And the monster is like, with the exception of Frankenstein and Dracula and The Mummy, which are very, very similar films, the monster is this very charming person who also turns into this beast. Yeah. And the Brendan Fraser one is basically like an Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, it's an action adventure
with
movie.
Like this evil monster. Yeah. And I love the Brendan Fraser one.
Yeah. Spoiler: none of us saw the Tom Cruise one, but that's not going to change anytime soon.
Did anyone see the Tom Cruise one?
No one saw the Tom Cruise one.
Yeah. So, fun fact.
It's fun.
I'll tell you a story.
That was a $200 million movie.
It's fun when you make a movie to launch a universe and the first movie just kills everything. It's such garbage
that I'll tell you a fun little story here really quickly. So, Alex Kurtzman is the guy who directed and wrote the Tom Cruise Mummy, right? Mm-hmm. And he is the former writing partner of let's not name him, but you can look him up on IMDb if you want. Another big screenwriter, and you guys probably don't because you weren't in the screenwriting program, but so you know him, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know him, but so this guy would come in on Saturdays and give special classes to the screenwriters at our film school, and he's like it was like a very like nice thing of him to do because he's a really
big name.
Really big name. He's made tens of millions of dollars. He wrote like Star Trek, Transformers, blah blah. And one Saturday we were breaking for lunch, and I was in line. I was the last person in line, and he was behind me, and he and I were talking. And I had been sick recently, and one of my traditions when I get sick and I'm like laid up on the couch for a while is I watch the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie. And he was like, I'm actually in the process of rewriting that. And he's like, what would you do if you were to rewrite that movie? And I was like, well, the obvious thing to me as a fan, if you're, because he didn't say to me, we're doing another Mummy. And it could be Boris Karloff. It could be, he's like, we are working on something that is directly related to the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies. I guess everything changed after that. But I was like, well, it makes sense because they have a kid in the second one, right? You do something in the 50s or 60s with the kid or grandkid or whatever, and then you have continuity. You can bring Brendan Fraser in there. And he goes, oh, I didn't know they had a kid. But it's like so indicative to me, I'm not shitting on him, of how these Hollywood approaches, like, this guy's getting paid all this money, and he's going to all these meetings, and he hasn't seen the movie! And I'm like, what's going on?
He saw the original, not the next two, and...
Oh, yeah.
They need some what's that called when you read scripts? Coverage people, like Asha was talking about in your other podcast.
The kid is a big part of the second and third movie.
Like, here's a sheet of what happened in those other movies.
Or if you're, or just do the Boris Karloff one and like don't look at the Brendan Fraser ones, but like don't not know that they have a kid. Anywho, there's about 1 million versions of Dracula.
There's tons.
And so did you know that so there's the Bela Lugosi one. There's a Spanish language version that was filmed at the same time as the Bela Lugosi one.
Makes sense.
So they would film Bela Lugosi,
Spanish
and it's actually, I found out recently, it's Bela Lugosi. Okay. So they would film the Bela Lugosi ones during the day, and the Spanish language one at night. And the Spanish language one is actually considered to have had a better director. So it's visually more interesting.
Oh, you mean they would bring in a whole different crew?
A whole cast and crew.
In the same location?
Same sets and same script.
Dang.
And then they would just do it in Spanish. But the guy who plays Dracula in the Spanish one is a total ham. And it's like hard to take seriously because Bela Lugosi is like a great actor. But the directing is really good. It's really interesting to watch them both. But I love, and this is something we can talk about too, because this is it a remake or is it a readaptation of the source material? I love the Francis Ford Coppola one.
Yeah,
with Gary Oldman as Dracula and like the worst English accent you've ever freaking heard in your life from Keanu Reeves. My dear Mina, I'm going to Budapest. And this Anthony Hopkins is insane as Van Helsing. He is insane.
It's a very fun movie, and with films like that, it's hard to say it's a remake because it is based on source material. That's a book. Yeah. So can you be like, it's a remake of that movie? Or I'd be like, no, it's not. It's another adaptation of this book, right? And I've read the book.
But I mean, to me, that's Francis Ford Coppola's fourth best movie or whatever you call
Behind
it.
Apocalypse Now and
The Two Godfathers. Well, and you have The Conversation too. Yeah. But like outside of his 70s work, that to me is his best movie.
Yeah. That's a guy who just came in, beasted, and then just faded away.
But I just love that movie. But so Nosferatu, the 1922 version, is an adaptation of the same thing as Dracula, but I would say is enough of its own movie.
It's funny because that's the one when you think Dracula and vampires, you think of that one, Nosferatu, first and foremost. You don't think of Bela? I think of Bela Lugosi. I think of Max Schreiner. But so what about the Werner Herzog Nosferatu from the 70s? Because that's a very good movie. But I don't think I've seen that one. I really like that movie, but I could see someone being like, why does this exist? Yeah. Although Klaus Kinski as Nosferatu... Yeah, you gotta watch Klaus Kinski, come on. That's why that movie exists. Klaus Kinski is a beast. Yes, he is. And then, the most shit monster movie remake ever probably is that Benicio del Toro Wolfman.
Oh, I saw that in theaters with my dad, 2006, right? I do believe I saw it as well. It's not. I thought it was like 2009. I don't remember. Honestly. No, it was before that because I was in high school. It was in high school. It's been a while, yeah. And Anthony Hopkins is in it. It was like 03 or 04. Hopkins is in everything. He is. I don't think it's like a bad. Wait, what am I trying to say? It's a terrible movie, but it's not a bad idea to make a Victorian London Wolfman film. Yeah. It's just bad. It's just bad. And there's just so many good horror or good werewolf movies from the 70s and 80s that's like The Howling and American Werewolf in London. Those came out the same year, right? So I guess still monster movies, but not Universal Monster. Godzilla. Yes. Have some blurbs I'll let you guys go. But what's interesting to me is that the original Gojira was directed by Ishiro Honda, who was in World War II. And the film was in part based on his experience of coming back. He was repatriated to Japan through either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, I forget which one, and saw firsthand the devastation of the bomb. Mm-hmm. And Godzilla is obviously a manifest. So there's the fishing boat incident. If you're unfamiliar with this, there was nuclear testing going on Pacific Islands. And a bomb blew up
too close to a Japanese fishing boat, and it contaminated people on the boat, and then it spread these fears throughout all of Japan of, because they eat so much fish, with sushi and everything. Yeah. Oh shit, are we eating contaminated fish? And in the beginning of Godzilla, there's a boat and there's the radiation, and it's directly tying into that, but also based on Ishiro Honda's experience of being in World War II.
Right.
And so, there's two American remakes of Godzilla, right? And then you also have the Japanese one that came out pretty recently.
Right. Well, I'll let you say your point, then I have something to say about that.
Well, the 1998 Roland Emmerich Godzilla is such a piece of shit, I'm not even going to talk about it, other than to say it's a Mondo piece of shit, and why does it even exist? I was really excited I loved Monsters, which is directed by Gareth Edwards, which is this like really low budget movie that takes place in the future where aliens have taken over basically Mexico and southern parts of America, and these people have to get from Central America to the U.S. by going through where the aliens live. And I loved that movie. And he directed the Godzilla remake from 2014 or whatever, so I was really excited about it. And when the first trailer shows a nuclear reactor blowing in a plant, and this was not that long after the Fukushima thing happened. And I was like, oh, they're actually trying to tie it into real-world disasters again and make it representative of something meaningful. And then that turned out not to be the case at all. It's just a dumb... It's not bad, but it's just kind of a dumb monster movie.
Well, going off that, I was going to talk about the piece of crap, 1998.
The Roland Emmerich one, go for it.
But it every time there's a Godzilla remake in the U.S., it compels Japan to make a Godzilla remake. So off of that one, we got Godzilla 2000. A year later, by the way, in 1999. And then for the 2014 Godzilla remake from Edwards, we got Shin Gojira, which was actually a political satire of
liked that movie a lot.
The nuclear reactor, actually being
and like Japanese
sort
bureaucracy.
Exactly.
It's almost like so if you haven't seen that movie, Shin Godzilla, it's so fast, the dialogue.
It's really fast. And because if you see the subtitle version, you have to
you almost have to pause it to keep up with it. And it's like it's like that's spot on of it's like a political satire of bureaucracy and how reactions work to disasters, basically. But I thought it was a really good movie.
Yeah.
And then and there's a lot of Godzilla movies. Godzilla versus Gigante. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I never really saw him.
So some guy, I've seen a ton of them. I've seen the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. I've seen Mothra. I've seen when I was a kid, I watched a ton of these movies. But there's one that came out in the 80s where a scientist takes a piece of Godzilla DNA and makes a plant monster out of it, and then Godzilla fights the plant. He makes Venusaur monster. But what's funny about it is that, the self-awareness of Godzilla movies, and again, they lose the substance. They really do. You can't... when you're in the 1980s, you've lost connection with World War II, and you've lost these filmmakers who are trying to make these movies about these things, and you're just making monster movies. It's just the reality of it. But but Godzilla versus Gigante, or whatever it's called, is a sequel to Godzilla 1984, and obviously in every movie Godzilla destroys part of Tokyo, right? So in this one there's a Godzilla memorial cafe that's built in one of his footprints. So there's booths built into where his toes were and shit like that. And that to me works because it's just silly, and you're building on the mythology of the series.
Although I am excited for what's the next one? Godzilla versus
is it Rodan or
Rodan?
Was Rodan in the last one? I don't remember.
No, it's not Rodan.
Honestly.
Isn't it Kong or something?
They are tying that in, but I thought
there's two movies coming out,
right?
And one of them's the director of The Guest, Adam Wingard.
Oh, is it really?
Doing one, and I don't know which one.
And then there's Skull Island.
Oh, that's Godzilla versus Kong.
There may be Godzilla versus Kong.
Well,
there is Godzilla versus Kong.
Let's talk about King Kong.
I'm getting confused then. All right,
because we have the 1933 King Kong, we have the Jeff Bridges one, we have the Peter Jackson one, and then the Skull Island.
Yeah.
Obviously the original one is an undisputed classic. I really liked the Peter Jackson one.
See, I'm just not a huge fan of... I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of big monster movies like Godzilla and King Kong. I didn't see any of them because... It's just not.
You haven't seen the original King Kong?
I saw the original like a long time ago.
Okay.
I'm talking about the newer ones that have come out.
Yeah, I saw the
years.
Jeff Bridges one when I was a kid. And I don't remember anything about it.
Yeah, so I can't really comment about him too much because.
Did you see the Peter Jackson one?
Yeah,
What do you think? Some people hate it. But
I don't remember it. I remember it was 3 hours.
Yeah, it's long as
If you don't
hell,
remember it,
but
that means it probably wasn't that good.
I really
right?
liked it. But to me, there was a reason to do that because it's.
I like the whole thing about going to the island and like making a monster movie. That's like being self-aware, right?
But it's like the original King Kong was made when they're doing like it's basically like claymation monsters and like
31, right? Or
super early.
Really
I thought it was like 33.
What's his name? Who's the stop motion guy? Jason and the Argonauts. Dude?
Yeah, Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah. He didn't do that. Yeah, he was too young.
But Peter Jackson expanded upon. He gave the characters backstory. He explored like the mythology of the world, and he used CGI to make these amazing monsters. Yeah. And there's the King Kong fighting 3 T-Rexes scene, and like it's just nuts.
Oh wait, is Naomi Watson?
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, she
Jack
was
Black.
Yeah, they do the whole Empire State Building.
Kyle
scene.
Chandler's in it.
Yeah,
and. So,
like they bring him back to New York, right? Then he becomes like this. Actually, it was a good movie. Like I like what they were trying to do. I like what they were trying to do with it.
Well, and there's
trying to display like King Kong, and it's like what is it? Creatures should not be displayed like that.
So speaking of giant apes, Tim Burton, Planet of the Apes.
Oh yes.
Whoo, that's a bad movie.
I actually don't remember it.
But the thing is, that to me...
Remember my dad rented it on VHS at one point, but...
I saw that movie in the theaters.
Did I see it in the theater?
But there's
I might have. I don't remember it, though.
To me, it's conceptually interesting to think of Tim Burton doing a Planet of the Apes movie. Because of his imagination, the way he works. But
you could expect something good from him. I've seen some of the original ones, the original and some of the other ones, the old ones. I haven't seen the new ones. Again, it's like... It's just not something that appeals
what's
to
the
me.
one? The Ninja Turtles. I have this on my list.
I saw those because I do like.
You know what I
Ninja
found?
Turtles.
But those were bad, weren't they?
Of course they were bad.
Yeah, I found out that there was a 2007 movie. I didn't even know that. Like
What?
I thought there was only the 2014 movies. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie.
Yeah.
It was animated though, wasn't it?
No, it's live action.
What?
I don't know what you're talking about. There's the 2 with the Megan Fox in it.
Right.
Oh, 2007 is not live action?
I thought that was an animated
Oh,
movie.
okay, my bad.
And that's apparently pretty good.
Oh, okay.
I've seen the original 3, and while they're not like amazing or anything, they're very silly.
They're just good for what they are.
They're kind of family friendly. They're fine. And the third one's completely
also,
insane.
Vanilla,
they go to feudal Japan.
And it's like, Vanilla Ice is in the second one.
Yes.
Like it's just fun. They're fun movies.
The new ones were
atrocious. They're like these Michael Bay trash bags of like just chaos and noise and stupidity.
Isn't there an awesome like motorcycle chase in the second one though, or it's not
in the remake second one?
There might be, but a chase doesn't.
There's like a scene.
Tyler Perry's in the second one apparently.
Tyler Perry in Gone Girl, by the way.
He's fantastic.
Amazing.
Right?
And so I saw David Fincher speak at a screening of Gone Girl, and Elvis Mitchell was interviewing him, and he's like, why did you cast Tyler Perry? And he's like, when we shot, I think it was when he shot House of Cards, he was driving around looking for studios to use, and they went to see Tyler Perry's studio. And Tyler Perry was standing on the roof of one of the studios flying a remote control airplane. And David Fincher pulled up, and Tyler Perry's assistant was like, Mr. Perry will be with you when he's done with his airplane. David Fincher, when they went to cast that role in Gone Girl, was like, Tyler Perry is this fucking guy. We have to cast him in this movie.
He'll be with you when he's done with this airplane. That's when you know you're a big shot. You make David Fincher wait while you play the airplane. One of the best working directors we have. And you don't give a fuck.
The day is Halloween, dude.
What else we got?
The Departed. The Infernal Affairs movies are great fucking movies, and I understand why, like, purists of Hong Kong cinema...
That's his second remake, huh? Scorsese's second remake.
Yeah.
But The Departed is just such a good movie. It really is.
It's a good movie, but I remember I really liked the movie, and I think the performance was really well. The cast was great. The direction was great. I just wish that Scorsese had won an Oscar for one of his other movies, which I like better.
Like
Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Or I'll say I liked Goodfellas. I liked Taxi Driver. I liked Raging Bull. Did he do Deer Hunter?
No.
No.
Michael Cimino.
But like those 3 films, Raging Bull,
Who crashed
Taxi
the studio, by the
Driver,
way.
Goodfellas, and even Casino, I think I like better than The Departed. I'm not saying it's a bad film, but like it was basically one of those like, sorry, we didn't give you one for all these other amazing films you've made. Here's one.
Interesting thing about his acceptance speech. During his acceptance speech, I remember he like thanked Elia Kazan. Everyone in the audience was just like, "How the fuck could you thank that piece of shit director?" But for obvious reasons, I mean, he betrayed all his friends or whatever. But anyway,
I remember he's a better director than the rest of them, so he can thank whoever he wants to thank, right?
I remember him saying in his because Taxi Driver, I think he wasn't even nominated for Best Director, but he was nominated for like Best Picture, and he's like, "Who the fuck made that movie then? If it wasn't me,
another thing
is
about
Rocky
Departed,
won that year
about Departed.
Over Taxi Driver.
They recut it. Like apparently they had a cut of the movie and they started over again because he said he didn't like it or whatever. He said they cut it twice.
Departed?
Yeah. But
I saw The Departed in theaters opening weekend in Massachusetts.
Oh boy!
And so I went to UMass, which is University of Massachusetts, and most of the people. I went to the Amherst campus, which is the biggest one. It's like 30,000 students, maybe 25,000, and most people who go there are from the Boston area because that's the most populated part of Massachusetts. So it was like all of these people from Boston, probably drunk because it was a Friday night, watching that movie. They were losing their fucking minds. And spoiler alert, but at the end of that movie when Mark Wahlberg shoots
Matt Damon,
the theater erupted. Like people were cheering, people were standing up, like they were so excited.
It was a fun moment, right?
It is. But, well, and Mark Wahlberg.
And the rat crawls across the fence.
He could he would win if he ran for mayor of Boston. Yeah. So what? I mean, these are like.
Let's just rifle through some.
Total Recall and or RoboCop? Did anyone see any of those?
Saw all of them.
Yeah, I saw the remake. I have the remake on Blu-ray, actually.
The idea of
steel case
of remaking,
because I bought it at Walmart and I wanted to buy it. That's why.
So to me, Paul Verhoeven at the pinnacle of his career, I would say, is as good a filmmaker, if not better, than people like Spielberg. And who are the other giant action film directors?
Of what?
Speaking of
James
which,
Cameron.
I wouldn't say he's better than James Cameron, but I'm saying Paul Verhoeven is equally adept as a director, I think, as a lot of those guys, and he has a very clear point of view. He grew up in Nazi-occupied Netherlands, and his films address fascism, manipulation of public opinion, the obsession with violence, all of these things that what's the one with the bugs? Starship Troopers. Great fucking movie. Yeah. And they're all satires. Even Basic Instinct, people are like, oh, it's retrogressive sexual politics because the bad person is bisexual, and that's a trope that you see a lot of associating criminality with homosexuality. But it's obviously a satire. All of these movies he's making are satires of types of fascism. And to remake someone who's that good of a filmmaker and has that clear a point of view, to me, is just dangerous, because it's you're never going to be able to do what he did. So why are you doing it?
Yeah, and it's I think they, especially with RoboCop, it's they got Joel Kinnaman to play RoboCop, who I actually like as an actor quite a bit. Too, yeah. I think he's really good.
Who Olivia Munn, by the way, suggested that he do RoboCop instead of the big studio film at the time.
And that was and what. They made it a PG-13 movie, and I always hate when they...
RoboCop is so
violent.
Hard R.
Yeah, and they made it a PG-13 movie. And that's the point of it. You're... And they just introduced all these plots into it, and it just didn't work, and it was I
heard Disney's remaking Irreversible.
Yeah.
So...
But this one they're going to do in order instead of backwards.
Yeah.
So they'll end with the rape, and that's the ending.
That's the middle of the movie.
Well, they'll just end on that.
So, Mike, this is one for Mike.
Oh, boy.
It made a debate.
Oh, I just want to say, hold up.
By the way, speaking of Verhoeven being as adept as these other directors, Steven Spielberg actually saw Agent Orange, a movie he made.
It's one of his movies from the Netherlands, right?
Yeah, and then he was like, you should come make movies in America. And those are the types of movies he made.
And then
I don't know if they're still friends.
Yeah, and made some movies. Then Spielberg's like, stop making such good movies. You made me look bad.
So famously, Fistful of Dollars is a remake, uncredited remake of Yojimbo, the Kurosawa movie.
It's a shot-for-shot remake.
To the point, well, the intro especially, like the first scene is basically exactly the same. It's such different context. And also, people have pointed out that Yojimbo is there's no proof or documentation of this at all. But Red Harvest, which is a Dashiell Hammett novel, is essentially the exact same plot as Yojimbo. And Kurosawa was known to love American noir, so he may have read that novel and just... But that, to me, is an example of a really well done, like, tonally they're very different. Like, Yojimbo is, like, kind of a comedy and, like, a dark satire of, like, samurai movies. So, I mean, you want to talk about Fistful of Dollars?
Yeah, I mean, all of Leone's films, at least the ones I've seen most of them, are... They're very serious. Like they have and he has his own. He's a very good visual director,
and he doesn't like dialogue.
He doesn't like dialogue.
Yeah, and Kurosawa really likes witty dialogue and like.
So, A Fistful of Dollars is basically part of the trilogy, and it's the first one. Even though they're related in a sense that they're similar characters and actors and stuff like that, but they're not like direct sequels or anything like that. And A Fistful of Dollars is like it's just it's a simple plot. You know, this gunfighter goes to town and he plays both sides of two gangs and comes out on top. What I found interesting about that is just like the interaction and the friendship he develops with like the hotel owner, the guy who's making all the coffins. And there's some very interesting...
what does he say? Get 3 coffins ready, make that 4?
Like, my bad,
it's
make
so
that 4.
Badass. So badass.
And it's just like there's these cool scenes where he sets up these 2 dead soldiers in a graveyard, so people think that they're like guarding something, and he plays both sides really well. It's
Yojimbo does a very good job of like the way that he sets people up to think one thing's going to happen and something else happens.
But it's definitely, of the 3, it is my least favorite of the 3 trilogy, Dollars trilogy. And it does feel the most dated as well. To me, it's clearly one of his earlier films, and he clearly had a very small budget to do it. And it's almost like when we talked about The Evil Dead, it's like they made a film and he's like, here's some more money, make another version of it. To me, for a few dollars more, his second film is kind of probably the film he wanted to make more. But now he had money. Now he can go get Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood and John Volante, I think, is the bad guy who plays the bad guy in both of those.
I mean, but like to me, the perfect example of how to transpose a movie from one culture to another and adapt the context and make it a meaningful, worthwhile remake is the Western to the samurai film. Yeah, because they work so well as like parallel periods in history. Obviously, not time wise, they didn't line up, but like
it's like the weapon of choice in each one.
Works so
and they both kind of have the same kind of moral code.
And like his loner,
especially the wanderer who's like not really good, but not like an evil person. He has like his moral compass, and he'll do some things and others.
Well, and you have Magnificent Seven as an adaptation of Seven Samurai.
Yeah, and then the remake of Magnificent Seven, which was
I didn't see that
like 2 years ago. I saw that
2016.
Was it good? Did you see it?
It was okay.
I saw it. It was premiering in Toronto. I was at Toronto 2016.
Funny story. I saw that with some friends here in Culver City, and when we were leaving, we saw Natalie Portman with her husband just hanging out,
just chilling
out. And I didn't believe one of my friends, so I walked back to see. I didn't like go and
she
talk
was
to
like,
them.
"Who's that terrifying?"
She's like, "Yeah, who's this monster?" This is when she was pregnant. I didn't want to bug them, but I just was like, I'm guessing she was in town doing something in Sony or wherever.
They went to the movie theaters. Isn't that crazy?
I don't know if they were seeing a movie or they had a kid who was watching a movie.
So that movie theater, the
idea.
ArcLight in Culver City, is like somebody else I know. Maybe was it you? I don't know. Someone saw Emma Stone there. I think like people see celebrities at that movie.
That movie theater is really close to Sony Studios, so.
Well, and it's also like right behind that is Culver Studios, which is where like Mel Brooks has his office and stuff.
So yeah, it makes sense.
12 Monkeys is an interesting case because I don't think it was credited, but it's based. So La Jetée, which is the Jetty, I think, is a Chris Marker film. So it was a French New Wave film, and it's told all through photographs. It's all stills and voiceover. But it's the exact same story. La Jetée is like 30 minutes or something like that. But Terry Gilliam did 12 Monkeys. Terry Gilliam is not an idiot, so he obviously knew that they were remaking this film. And I don't know if they just didn't bother to get the rights to it. I don't know exactly what the situation was. But that's an interesting case of like, let's take this experimental avant-garde 30-minute French movie and make like flesh it out and make a big like full
that goes back to
science
taking
fiction.
the essence of it and
although it is like the ending especially is it's exactly the same.
with the I know I can't describe
but it's an interesting concept of like, and a remake of a short film is interesting too, because often what you see is a short film as a proof of concept for the feature, and then the same people go and make. But to look at a short film and be like, oh, we could redo this and flesh it out as like a different group of people is really interesting to me. Here's another one from Mike: Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah. So that's, I think it's not Carpenter's first film, but it's one of his
earliest ones though.
Because I think Dark Star is his first film. And then the remake was Antoine Fuqua, I think, and it had Ethan Hawke and Lawrence Fishburne, I think.
Lawrence Fishburne is definitely in it.
I think.
And Ethan Hawke.
And I'm pretty sure Ethan Hawke's here. Maybe the director's wrong, but I think it was him.
Let's look it up.
Look it up for me real quick. What I remember is
2005.
The original,
directed by Jean-Francois Richet.
Okay, I was completely wrong.
Who the hell is that?
No idea.
Oh, he directed Mesrine, those French gangster movies. Okay.
So the original was it was a very cheap, very simple movie. Basically, these cops kill some gang member, and it's like a Cholo gang, and they do some kind of Chicano Cholo ritual where they basically put a blood hit or whatever on cops, and that they don't care who dies, they're gonna hit them. And the rest of the film is basically these guys in a prison fighting off this horde of...
It's an assault.
It's an assault.
Smart filmmaking.
It's really
extremely smart filmmaking.
And what's interesting, I was reading about it, it's like, if you look at it, it's kind of the precursor to all these horde games where you're in a building and these hordes of like zombies and people try to break in. Because there's literally scenes in that film where it's just a shot of a window and people just keep trying to get in and just keep getting blasted. And they have like no common sense to stop. They just keep barreling in and they just keep shooting.
It's crazy to see how barren
like
LA was in that film. Like, it's so like just desolate landscape. Like, this is a desert, even though
what blows
Los
my
Angeles
mind
is a desert, you know?
Is watching LA films from the 80s and everything's so green. And now everything is dead.
And was it water in the LA River?
Yeah.
There probably wasn't any water in there.
The sequel, pretty forgettable, despite Ethan Hawke and Lawrence Fishburne, who are both really good. I think it was a very similar plot.
You mean remake?
Well, so what was interesting to me is, and this is when the remake came out, was when the film critic literati decided to revisit the original and declare it a classic.
I mean, it makes sense. So someone's like, "Oh, that's a classic. Let's make it." It's like a quick, like we were mentioning, like they're making it to make money, not because the original was well made. It was a very low budget, well made
film. But that always happens with these movies where, like, I'm trying to think of like a more recent, well known example, but it's like. A movie will come out and the critics at the time are like, this movie's garbage. But then the people who see it when they're young love it. And when they become the film critics,
a lot of the films we've talked about
like,
were trash when they came out. The Thing was trashed and was a critical failure. Blade Runner was trashed.
It was also a critical failure because E.T. had come out the year before? And that
same year, right?
It was the same year. Okay, but it came out before The Thing.
Right? Yeah. Well, I'm saying, it came out like 2 weeks before. I'm saying... I'm not really getting into the reasons why. I'm just saying The Thing was not well received and didn't do well, but now it's a classic. Blade Runner, same thing. It was not well received. It made no money. Now it's a classic. There's a lot of other...
but Blade Runner also had that voiceover.
The voiceover,
and then 92, the director's cut
bad.
like green. That's why people started getting interested because he cut the voiceover.
But that movie was so influential.
And then there's a 25-year anniversary of that release, and there's all this other stuff. So there are films that like do poorly, and then later on sort of get a new life. Carpenter's films do pretty well with that, like Assault on Precinct 13,
basically,
Escape from New York. Escape from New York wasn't.
They Live.
They Live is amazing.
It's like a cult classic.
It's funny because a lot of people don't know about that film or might not have seen it.
They Live.
They Live. It's probably my second favorite John Carpenter film behind the thing.
And the crazy. Tell the story about the crazy fight scene of why that.
So spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. The film stars Roddy Piper, who's a professional wrestler. I'm a big wrestling fan as well. And Keith David, who was in The Thing, who's in a lot of Carpenter films. And there's these sunglasses that allow the characters to see people, aliens disguised as people. And then there's all these messages about consumerism and stuff like that. So in the middle, there's a fight scene that is basically really, really long. And basically, they're just going back and forth, hammering each other, punching each other, slamming each other into cars, dropping each other up and down, just going crazy. And what I read is Carpenter imagined that fight scene being basically like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, right? But he let them plan it out, choreography it out. So,
and should we say maybe it was a mistake to let a professional wrestler choreograph a fight that he wanted to be 20 seconds long?
And so they started rolling, right? And they're filming, and Carpenter has what he needs, but he's like, just let him go. And they just kept going, and it just didn't end.
It's like 5 minutes long.
If you watch South Park, the episode Cripple Fight is a direct parody of that, where it's in that episode basically Jimmy and Timmy fight and they're cripples, and the fight is really, really slow and they're barely hitting each other and they're really slow. There's just people around watching and it's like super long and just keeps going. And that's what happens in They Live. It's like it feels over and then they get up and they start going.
And they're both big dudes.
They're both big dudes,
it's an impactful fight scene.
Yeah.
Wicker Man?
The
bees! Why did that happen?
Nicolas Cage.
I've seen both of those, man, and I don't love the original, but I understand why it's so.
I just remember
revered.
My friend telling me something like the movie was so fucked up because he's a virgin in the original one. They sacrifice him. That's some dark ass shit.
It came out in 73, I think.
Yeah.
And I feel like with The Wicker Man, I don't think it's a great movie, but the ending is very iconic. But
spoiler alert! Sorry.
Spoiler alert! The ending's very iconic, but I feel like everyone who either has seen the movie or knows what the ending is, right?
Yeah.
So I feel there's no point of remaking it because everyone already knows the most important part of that film, and you can't change that ending.
Have you seen that stuff on YouTube?
If you change the ending, it destroys the whole film.
So the remake
right?
has Nicolas Cage in it.
Oh boy!
And the greatest hits of that movie, like if you go on YouTube and just Google like Nicolas Cage Wicker Man, it's completely insane. It's like impossible to describe how insane that movie is. And not in a good way.
It's Nicolas Cage.
So I'm going to make a very bold declarative statement, but this is maybe the ultimate example of a great remake of all time. Scarface.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of taking like what was a 30s
another Howard Hawks movie. God damn, this motherfucker is on fire. Howard Hawks. I'm sorry, I have to go back to Howard Hawks.
Director, right?
But what's that?
Brian De
Palma did the remake.
The 80s.
But the original one is like a classic, scuzzy, violent,
like
old
20s,
school
right?
gangster.
No,
30s, I thought.
30s, early 30s.
Yeah.
31.
Yeah, it's
31.
really
And it was violent, and it was dirty, and it was dark,
Incesty.
and it was so much of its time. And then to make it about, I mean, the Oliver Stone script is genius. To make it about the exodus from Cuba, and then like the cocaine thing in Miami in the 80s, and Scarface is the 83 or 81, or when did it come out?
83.
It's such a good movie.
I don't know if it was Scarface or it might have been the Michael Cimino film with that takes place in Chinatown. But Oliver Stone wrote both either way. But actually, it was the other film, so I'm gonna dismay my point or throw out my point. But what was I gonna say?
The pile of cocaine that
Yes, you brought something.
Al Pacino
Go ahead.
stuck his face into at the end of. That was just Oliver Stone's cocaine for the day.
And Oliver was like, "We only got one take. I don't want you snorting all my cocaine up in these multiple takes, you motherfucker. I need that cocaine."
Oh my god! The stories about Oliver Stone wrote Midnight Run, right? What's the movie about the guy who's in the prison and has to escape?
Oh, El Salvador? No,
There's like 50 million movies like that.
No, but it's like a really famous one. He's in a Turkish prison, and it's a true story.
Well, we have Google, guys.
But it's Midnight Express.
Oh, yeah, I kind of know.
It's not Midnight Run. That's a De Niro movie. Anyway, the guy whose experience that is based on got together with Oliver Stone to write the script, and the guy was like, we were in a hotel room for like 7 days straight. Oliver Stone did not sleep. He did not leave. He was doing cocaine like nonstop, and he was drinking cocktails like the whole time. It was just like out of his fucking mind.
That's awesome.
So JFK is like his autobiography. Huh?
JFK is amazing.
But I want to say one thing about Scarface, the original one, Howard Hawks. Fantastic genre director. I have to bring that up again. But like the scene where they're shooting at Paul Mooney, like they actually had sharpshooters on set shooting at him.
Did they really?
Yeah, shooting at him like
crazy.
Sharpshooters. And he had to like be like still, you know, there's that scene I think where he's like still or something.
But not Paul Mooney.
Terrified.
Different Paul Mooney.
Around you.
So, and so in Throne of Blood, fun movie fact, totally unrelated to what we're talking about. Throne of Blood is a Kurosawa adaptation of Macbeth. There's a scene where Toshiro Mifune is having all these arrows shot at him, and they had actual archers shooting at him. And in the movie, it's almost this, because in part the film was based on Japanese theater. And so this is no theater, and there are minor aspects of kabuki in the theatricality of Mifune's performance at the end. But he's pointing with his hands, like as he's kind of falling over, and he would point so that the archers knew that's where I'm going, so that they didn't actually shoot him. Yeah. But they were like actually shooting live arrows at him.
That's crazy to me.
So
OSHA wouldn't let you do that these days.
No.
I'm gonna pivot into some questions in a minute, but one last one before we go there. Ghostbusters?
Oh, yes, I have something to say.
Oh my god, Mike's infuriated.
No, Fierce. I haven't seen the new one. I'm not. So I won't talk about it, even though I heard whatever. Everyone heard about it. The originals are fun. It's like one of those. Like again, I'm bringing up the same point. Well-made movie, made a lot of money. I don't see where the benefit of a remake for that is, because if it was a crappy movie, you'd be like, oh, this is a really interesting idea. Let's remake it, because they obviously had a good idea, but something the execution didn't work, didn't nail it. Just remaking it, and putting women in the role doesn't really. It's the same thing with Ocean's 8? What is it?
Yeah,
it's the same thing. It's like there's really no point for that remake. You can just make that movie and call it something different with the female cast,
right?
And it would be better.
But the
idea is there.
I understand the point of saying, though, because I am very much of two minds about this, and it's like, as women, you've been historically disenfranchised for so long that if a studio says, yeah, do Ocean's 11 and make it with all women, you're like, fuck yeah, we're going to take it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We're going to make it our own. We're going to do it. Instead of making your own movie, you take the franchise and make it yours. But then at the same time, I feel like I being a kind of an ordinary person or whatever, I would be like, no, fuck you, I'm going to make my own movie. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be better than your Ocean's thing. And we're going to make our own franchise, and we don't need to piggyback on your... So I understand both perspectives.
But to me, it's almost like a no-win situation, right? Because if you make a great movie, you'll still have all the people be like, why didn't they make their own movie? Or they're just piggybacking off that name. If you make a movie that's maybe not as good and doesn't make a lot of money, which neither of these remakes made as much as the originals, everyone's going to be like pointing out, like, look, see what happens, right?
Well,
so it's almost like a no-win
situation,
right?
I think really Ocean's 11 is a fucking great movie, and like one of the best heist movies I've ever seen.
It wasn't a badly made movie that called for a remake.
Where the original was. The Rat Pack one was not a particularly good movie.
And that's it. So, like, and they could have easily...
But it's also like...
spun it off
who directed the Ocean's 8? Do we know?
I'd have to...
Because Steven Soderbergh is a great director.
Yeah.
And do you really want to step into those shoes? Like, no, just make your own thing.
I mean, I don't blame any of the people involved.
No, it's not their fault.
It's hard enough to get a movie made and to get financing, and so...
Gary Ross, the man director.
Yeah. If studio gives you $100 million...
Kate Blanchett was in the movie, though?
Yeah, dude. And Sandra Bullock, Anne Hathaway,
it just didn't work. Because everyone was like, oh, they're just using the name Oceans to cash in.
Do you think they're going to do a Precious remake?
With a man?
No, with Gollum.
with a white man.
Precious.
By the way, were we talking about the hand earlier?
That's Will.
Were we talking about the hand in this one? The hand?
Yeah.
So that was directed by Oliver Stone, 1981.
Oh, boy.
Anyway.
He's probably coked out of his mind.
Okay, so this is an interesting, and Mike actually brought this concept up. Are they remakes? It's like a subgenre of the remake.
Midnight Express.
So the one that Mike brought up is Fury Road a remake of The Road Warrior?
And I've seen both, and I like both. It's similar enough. It's almost to be like a reboot almost, because it's the same character, Max. I think his name is like Max Rokostansky or something like that. Mad Max, and the second one and Fury Road are the most similar in design to each other, because the second one is a very long chase sequence as well, where the new one is basically just a chase for the whole thing. And
the greatest chase of all time.
And they're dealing with similar things, but I can't say that it's a remake, because there's enough in Road Warrior that doesn't happen in Fury Road, and it feels sort of just like a reboot.
To me, franchise. And that's also like, obviously this is the same franchise, so it's slightly different, but like, this is like my own little theory that I have, but there are movies that I think of as like template movies, and once they come out, everyone rips them off. And so, if you look at Die Hard, Passenger 57, Speed, Under Siege, and so on and so forth, Air Force One, are these unofficial shitty remakes of Die Hard, or are they just taking the same idea?
Well, that's taking the same idea and making it your own. But
is there a point to doing it?
Wasn't that like standard? Like you could pitch that idea in Hollywood back in the day, like it's Die Hard on a plane. It's Die Hard on a boat.
The Raid is Die Hard, but it's with badass martial artists, so it's not a kung fu movie because they're doing Silat, but like that to me works, because it's like, let's take Die Hard, but let's put martial artists in it.
See, to me, like,
but is that a remake?
Yeah. To me, that's a tough thing to say.
I mean, kind of, yeah.
I don't think any of those, like, you can't just like say an action film is Die Hard on this, right? Because there's action films before Die Hard. Yes, Die Hard was like
no, but I understand but Die Hard is a guy that someone doesn't know is there with some kind of expertise, trapped with terrorists. Yeah. That is exactly what Under Siege is. That's exactly what Passenger 57 is. That's kind of what Speed is.
Kind of, yeah.
So like it's like a subgenre of action movies.
Yeah.
And it's like Taken too. Like previous to Taken, you didn't have the subgenre of the angry middle-aged man revenge movie.
With skills?
Exactly.
You want to hear a really hot take?
But now you have John Wick and you have The Equalizer and like
well, Equalizer's a remake.
I thought it was based on a comic book.
No, it's based on a TV show.
Okay. You want to hear a hot take that's going to piss a lot of people off?
Okay, tell us.
I like. I think Under Siege is better than Die Hard.
You just like
everybody.
And I like Seagal better than Bruce Willis. I do like Seagal better than Bruce Willis.
Our hot take from so we did a podcast with our friend Jim about movies that we think were unfairly maligned by critics. And Jim really loves Blood Diamond, and Mike and I both think that Double Impact from Van Damme is better than Blood. Jim was fucking furious.
That's unrelated to one another. But it doesn't make any sense. Why was it? Why Blood Diamond to Double Take?
We were talking about films that are unfairly rated.
Double Take.
That are actually pretty good. So that's my hot take, is that I appreciate Die Hard. I like it. It's a good movie, but I like Under Siege better.
Under Siege more?
Because it's ridiculous. The whole knife fight scene at the end, and then he just starts throwing him around, and he's just beasting on everybody.
That's what Seagal does. He's a beast.
That's what I like.
Well,
that is what I like, because
my favorite Seagal movie is actually the Appalachia one.
Oh, Fire Down
Below.
Fire Down Below. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's. What I do like...
he's never been more condescending than he was in that movie.
He's never hurt either. Whereas Bruce Willis is just getting beat up and hurt.
What does he say to those guys when he beats the shit out of them, all those cops? He beats up all those local cops.
I can't remember.
He has the most beast condescending line in history.
That's his thing. He comes into a town and just insults everybody, the locals. Nobody knows what they're doing. Beats them up and then fixes some porches and then wins.
It's like a Western. Sounds like a Western. Then he leaves.
Yeah.
He
stays though. He marries that woman.
Oh, yeah. So it's a reversal of the Western kind of taking that myth. Does he come into the town though?
And yeah.
Well, because
it's like the Western.
But
myth,
he's a cop. He's not like some guy.
And he wears.
He like goes. He's sent there.
No, he's a He's a environmental agent.
And he also has the best coats
He has
in
the best
history.
coats in
He's
the
all these
history
weird
of
leather
film.
jackets.
And they're awesome. Anyway, that has nothing to do with
So,
remakes.
on the topic of are they or are they not remakes, there's a film called Wild Search, which is stars Chow Yun-fat. It's a Hong Kong movie directed by Ringo Lam, who's a famous Hong Kong filmmaker who actually did Maximum Risk, the Van Damme film, which Mike and I watched recently. And so Wild Search is about a child who witnesses a crime, a murder in Hong Kong, who is from a rural area, and Chow Yun-fat is like an urban cop, and it's about the kind of the tension between these rural, more traditional, like mainland Chinese types and like the Hong Kong urban, sophisticated, modern types. And people have accused it of being an unofficial remake of Witness, the Harrison Ford film. I think they're different enough that it's like maybe they watched Witness and we're like, that's an interesting premise. Let's look at how we can make it Chinese. But I don't think it's like it's so similar that it's like.
That's just a very common sort of device in film where someone sees something and they have to be protected, right? By someone who's skilled. That happens in like Eraser. You know, Vanessa Williams knows something and Schwarzenegger's protect her. It happens in almost any action film has some kind of sense of that where this very skilled person has to protect this not skilled person who got in over their head.
So then here's a question for Logan. City on Fire and Reservoir Dogs. Have you seen these two?
City on Fire was the
Chow Yun-fat, and it's so some people.
I assumed it was a Hong Kong movie.
I talked about this to someone recently. I thought it was you, but maybe it wasn't. But people have accused Reservoir Dogs of basically being an unofficial remake of City on Fire. I don't agree with that at all because like Reservoir Dogs is basically in real time. Except for the flashbacks. Yeah. And City on Fire takes place over the course of months. And it's like about, there is a jewel heist in it and there are...
But I guess you can't deny, I guess he took the going back to this term, the essence of City on Fire and, you know...
Well, I would argue that he didn't. They're both undercover cop movies, but there's a shitload of undercover cop movies from Hong Kong. Yeah. It's not just that one.
Right. So it's really hard.
There are a handful of shots in City on Fire that are replicated in Reservoir Dogs. But to me, that's him paying homage to a movie that he was inspired by. Yeah. But to me, the essence of Reservoir Dogs is there's a jewel heist where you never see the heist, and it all takes place in the aftermath of the heist. Right. That's the conceit.
Because it would have been too expensive to shoot.
Right? Yeah.
It's like we were talking about earlier. Is, for example, you know, the term remake is subjective too, because is like. David Fincher's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo a remake of the Swedish version, or is it an adaptation
of the book? Yeah.
And they have a lot of very similar stuff in it because it's the same source.
Here's my controversial hot take for you. I think the Fincher version is about 1,000 times better than the Swedish version.
I agree with you. I don't know how hot of a take that would be.
No, but a lot of people disagree and think the Swedish ones are way better.
I've seen the Swedish ones. The first one's good. The next two I just did not
How can you think that a movie made by David Fincher is worse than a movie made by some scrub that no one's ever heard of?
No, I like the...
But now we have the next thing going on where the sequel is going to be sort of comparing that to the original three?
Well, so the Claire Foy one...
No, the second one that's coming out here.
Yeah, it's unrelated to... It's a...
They're putting out another one, but it's not part of the original series.
Yes.
It's a new story.
They hired...
The girl that kicks the hornet's nest or whatever, that's not...
They're doing that?
Yeah, dude, it's coming out this December.
So basically,
but there's one coming out in like 2 weeks. That's completely
the one.
different.
With Lakeith Stanfield.
Claire Foy is the girl with the dragon tattoo.
The girl with the dragon tattoo. In this
Are we talking about the same movie?
And it's
the one with Lakeith Stanfield.
I don't know if he's
the girl who kicked the hornet's nest, right? That's the next one that's coming out.
So the story
that's coming out in a month is not called.
The story is the family. So the guy died before he could finish his book.
The girl in the spider's web.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The family hired a writer to finish the book. The guy had
outlines.
That's the fourth book, and that's what's coming out.
But he also had a laptop where he had outlines for several other.
And so they went through a long process to hire a writer that they felt best. But
there was also this whole thing of like he was a hardcore like communist, and he was like donating most of his money to like women's shelters and all this stuff, and he didn't believe in like consumerism and making money off of your art. And his partner, who was never actually married to him, wanted to carry on his ideals through his work, and she owned the laptop. but his dad and his brother own the rights to his estate.
And they want that money,
And
don't
she
they?
didn't want money, so she couldn't be bought from the laptop that had all these ideas for the books on. So I don't know how that situation resolved itself.
It may
it
be
was really
it may be
interesting.
some kind of agreement where they donate the proceeds or something like that. I
Yeah,
don't
so
know.
Lakeith Stanfield is in this movie.
He is. It's
called The Girl.
5.8 on IMDb. Right
Yeah, it's
now.
pretty low, but it's not out yet.
It's not. It's basically the sequel to the original 3 that were Swedish.
Yeah.
And the.
I guess whether or not it's a remake depends on whether you're watching the movie or whether you're reading the book.
Yeah, it's and whether you think is Fincher.
But I mean,
remaking
Frankenstein
the
is
film, or did you
another
read the book and
example
want
of
to
that,
do that?
right?
Yeah.
Like, is Frankenstein?
And there's been so many Frankensteins.
Yeah, are they remakes of the 31 Frankenstein, or are they readaptations of the book? Sherlock Holmes, the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, right? Like the Benedict Cumberbatch is not a remake of the fucking Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes. Like, they're just different.
They're just different. It's I think with remakes, it's a lot harder to say something is a remake when there's original source material that's in a different
Unless
format.
it's like very obviously ripped off.
But if it's like based on a book or a comic book or a graphic novel or something like that, and then you have several films that come from that, unless it's like almost like shot for shot or very similar, it's very hard to say that they're remaking a film versus they're doing an adaptation of the original source material.
Right.
Because I mean, how many Supermans and Spider-Man reboots have there been? But they're reboots, right? They're not, and they're all using like similar source material, but they're not all the same kind of film. Right?
Other hot take for you: 1989 Batman is the best Batman.
1998,
1989.
1989.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have a lot of people disagree
Michael
with you.
Keaton. Yeah,
I love the production design. I love
It's a
the
very
look.
fun movie, but
There's a lot of good things. The soundtrack's awesome.
Come on, what's better than
There's an awesome video game
The second
on the Sega Master
The Dark
System.
Knight.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
I like
It's just a very well.
I like
film.
Christian Bale in The Dark Knight. I like Heath Ledger.
And that's the film.
And the story is interesting, but it's like I haven't seen that movie since I saw it in the theaters, and I have no interest in ever seeing it again.
See, I like you too because like Mike's like the everyday man, like giving his opinion. Will's like the hardcore like critic with the difference of opinion every time almost.
Well, you gotta have.
But it works, right?
It just works, right?
It's like Abbott and Costello.
So, do we have any other remakes? Or
So I want to talk a little bit about
Logan's got some
the
stuff.
2010s Apes movies. So
Go for
those seem like reboots.
Those
right?
movies are awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
So are we want to classify those as reboots?
I
or
would call
remakes?
those reboots. Yeah.
Okay.
This is not something I'm not going to talk a lot about.
But then it still uses the apes, signage. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is the 2011
Yeah, I
one.
mean, maybe they're. I don't know enough about the originals to know if they're. No, but they're not because the first planet. It's on a different planet, right? Oh no, but he goes into the future. That's what happens.
And which one?
So then there are these prequels. Charlton Heston goes into the future, right?
Oh, for the sequels, you mean?
For the very first Planet of the Apes movie,
He's
Charlton,
on Earth.
He's on Earth. Yeah,
Right,
you find out at the
He
end.
goes into the future.
I can't remember, honestly.
Is that what happened?
I couldn't remember
if that
to
happened.
save my life.
Well, then why else would the Statue of Liberty be in the ocean?
Oh.
Yeah, he goes into the
He goes
future,
into
and the
the
apes
future.
have taken over. So these are prequels because they're showing you how the apes took over.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. That makes
But
sense.
I really like them.
It's all making sense, everyone.
But there's Bollywood. I have to mention this really briefly. There's insane Bollywood remakes of American movies that must be seen. There are two actually Indian remakes. One is Bollywood, and one is from a different film scene in India. 3-hour-long musical remakes of Mrs. Doubtfire.
Oh my
They are
goodness.
both on YouTube. And they are completely fucking insane, and you should go and find them and watch them. But there's a lot of these, because it's the way.
Why are Bollywood movies so goddamn long? Jesus
they're insane.
Christ.
I love it though. But the way that the
Gotta
copyright
work,
shit
man.
works, like they can make these movies in India, and they're not worried about whether anyone's like the studio that made Mrs. Doubtfire is going to sue them for making this Bollywood movie, like. So they remake movies without asking, and they just make these insane 3-hour-long adaptations. They're so good.
But I mean, all the Bollywood movies are like
They're long as hell.
2.5 hours or longer.
Yeah,
You know?
I saw one recently that was a remake of some other. It was like a comedy remake of some really serious violent movie, and it was like, what is going on? But it was really fun. It's on Netflix. You were going to say something before I start talking about Bollywood?
I don't know.
Spankings?
Maybe. I
What's
could
your
use
favorite
one.
remake? Should we conclude with
freaking
that?
idea.
Give us a
The
top.
Thing, probably.
Give
'cause
us
it's
a
one of my
top
top
3.
5
Oh yeah,
movies.
that's a remake.
Probably The Thing. And
These ending questions.
man, I don't know.
It's just fun. I might say.
What's some remakes?
Looking at my list.
Shoot some at me. Not like that.
Oh, can we take the like?
Wicker Man, Psycho.
I'm gonna go with the. I'm gonna say, can we choose a movie that was like the original? I thought was better than the sequel.
Yeah, for sure.
For the remake. I'm gonna go with the original 1970 Silence compared with the Martin Scorsese Silence from 2000.
Is that a remake or is it a readaptation of the book?
Well, okay, there's that.
God damn,
question again.
Scorsese's making a lot of remakes.
Well, and there's Fires on the Plane too, right? There's 2 versions of Fires on the Plane, but isn't that a book? I know Harp of Burma is based on a book, and that Koni Chikawa, who did Harp of Burma, did Fires on the Plane, the original. And then there's the guy who did the most recent Fires on the Plane did that really low budget, weird cyberpunk Tetsuo. Is that what it's called? Yeah, that movie.
Okay.
I would say The Mummy, honestly.
Mummy.
I fucking love the Brendan Fraser one, and I love the original one.
You know, I haven't seen those since 1999, whenever they came out. Where was it, 1999?
They're so good. I mean, they're corny, but so my little brother, he's like 8 years younger than me. So when The Mummy Returns came out, I think I was 19 and he was like 11.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrapped him in toilet because we love those movies. We wrapped him in toilet paper like a mummy when we went to see it in theaters, and he was like walking down the aisle like, ah. It was fun.
That's so
I love Brendan Fraser. I really do.
To think the Scorpion King gave The Rock a gigantic Hollywood career. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
That's bad CGI.
Gigantic.
So we got we got Silence, we got The Thing, we got The Mummy. I'm sure there's tons of others.
There's so
that
many.
Just can't be put on the spot.
Rob Zombie Halloween. People really like that movie.
I don't really like the new Silence. I was just saying I was going to pick the original Silence because I'm bad at like picking the favorite and all that stuff. But anyway.
So,
anywho, thanks for listening.
I hope you enjoyed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Go make some remakes.
Adios.
As the case may be.